The different patron tiers of my esteemed supporters are all keyed to certain positions or organizations in the world of Aqualon. In this monthly serial, The Daily Lives of Aqualon's Patrons, I write a continuing story for each of those tiers, turning my patrons into characters. My name is Koray Bierenheide, I'm the creator of Aqualon, and this is Let Me Read You, the series where I read short stories and tales from Aqualon to you. The Secret Sun focuses on the exploits of my technocrative Miakofluxum tier patrons, which currently encompass my wonderful parents, Mattis and Latife Bierenheide. The serial records their adventures and daily lives in the technocrat city of Miakofluxum, the moving city, which uses a powerful jump drive to regularly change location and is technologically centuries ahead of the curve above ground. Let me read you the January 2019 issue of The Secret Sun. "How are we looking on that weather data?" Ruben inquired around the cherry sucker in his mouth. The intermittent clacking against his teeth was somewhat unnerving, but not enough so for anyone in the weather station to complain. Of course, weather station was just a nickname the Soul Engineers had given the windowed box attached to the underside of one of the intersecting walkways that connected the center ring of Miakofluxum with the artificial sun at its heart. The so-called sun did indeed perform fusion reactions, providing light and heat to the underground city, but that was more or less a byproduct of the more magical properties it possessed. From the weather station, the whole team had an excellent view of the core of the city's jump drive, that magnificent feat of technomagic engineering that allowed Miakofluxum to rapidly relocate over vast distances. To do so, however, the services of the weather station were indispensable. Here, qualified Soul Engineers used the friction gradient between the base DeVry field of the Great Clockwork and the DVF of the Ember Sun to detect large-scale fluctuations in the former and to make predictions about the moods of the Great Clockwork. Why was this so important? Well, being the sort of living computer the Great Clockwork was, and given how the jump drive of the city traveled through what was sometimes referred to as its DVF space, sudden significant changes in its makeup could have dire consequences mid-jump. For example, in the decades after the Declaration of Existential Independence, when Miakofluxum, the center of the city of Borealis, had spooled up the old jump drive to escape the ban on technomagics and practical magic research, one of the Great Clockwork's moods had taken the city right under the surface of the lands of Inferno. Was the city supposed to be below the surface of Aqualon? Most certainly. The lands of Inferno? Well, the melodramatic name of the region was quite apt. Safely encased by the two mountain ranges called the Walls of Welton End, the lands of Inferno were a hellscape of volcanic and tectonic activity. The surface air was highly noxious, and the ground was hot and unstable. Severe earthquakes had rattled the underground city and caused significant damages before the drive had cooled down sufficiently to be spooled up again. Due to a sudden shift in the Great Clockwork's DeVry field, all jump calculations had been invalidated in the blink of an eye, and it had been just short of a miracle that they had not ended up inside a magma pocket and burned up altogether. This was the reason the weather station was so crucial. Here, the Soul Engineers made sure ample predictions of the Great Clockwork's DeVry field were calculated, and forecast data taken into account when making jump preparations. "We got a steamer incoming," Ezra replied to Ruben's query, not looking up from the floating displays of her soul computer. "I'll take it up to the hoppers," Mattis offered. "I was looking for an excuse to stretch my legs anyways." "And get a break from that damn clanking," he added in his mind. "Much obliged," Ruben replied, gazing at the Ember Sun with a hint of boredom. Mattis stood up from his desk, put his soul computer on screen lock, and then stretched a bit before moving to a slick metallic pedestal with a windowed box on top of it. Several lights indicated various statuses on its inside, and when the whole thing made a soft ding, Mattis opened the window to liberate a small black sphere from it, looking like a rather intriguing cloudy pearl. A bit of steam escaped the box, hence the name. Of course, the poo joke was quite necessary. The engineers were all a bunch of kids at heart. "Everything on here?" Mattis asked, seeking confirmation. "Unless there's a defect, you're good to go," Ezra confirmed. "All right. See you guys in a bit. Don't burn the house down," Mattis joked, putting the pearl in a protective case and pocketing it. Then he left through the sliding door and stepped into a rail cabin attached to the underside of the walkway, connecting the weather station to the center ring. It was a brief journey over, during which he could let his gaze wander across the vast cavity around which the city was constructed. In its center, of course, was the amber sun, emitting a bright beam along its vertical axis, ringed by walkways on all levels of the city. The city itself was behind the outer rings along the cavity wall, carved into rock and earth, further smaller cavities containing houses and halls. When he had arrived, he vacated the rail cabin and climbed up a short ladder onto the central ring. From here he could see the tall and wide marketplace, though at this time of the day it was fairly empty. He looked around and located the nearest jump station, walking over to it at a leisurely pace. Once he had arrived, he stepped inside and set the target to the only station located on the upper ring. One button press later, the whole world around him seemed to swim for a moment, and it contorted in strange ways as space was folded together at 2 points. Then he emerged from the target station. He took a brief look around. Whenever the city appeared in a new location, the soil surrounding it was a bit different, and in some parts it showed through the cavity walls. Up here he was as close as he would get, so he was afforded a more detailed look. Though more of a casual hobby, Mattis had a fable for geology, and when he had the opportunity to get up here, he always kept an eye out for mineral veins. He even owned a couple of geodes. But he didn't waste any time and looked while walking, which caused him to bump into someone. "Oh my," he exclaimed in surprise, while his victim just made a yelp. "I'm terribly sorry." "It's fine," a female voice replied, but she didn't linger, and instead hastened away, apparently in a hurry. All he could see was a flowing of long black hair, and as she moved away, a strangely appealing scent lingered. He shook his head and moved on to the control room. "That's what you get for looking up while walking," he chided himself. After he had reached the heavy doors of the control room, he punched in his access code and was cleared after a couple of seconds. The door hissed as it slid open, and Mattis stepped in. "Ladies and gentlemen, today's weather is in." I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, subscribe for more and click the bell icon to be notified. A like would surely appease the mighty YouTube algorithm, and feel free to ask me anything about this story or the world of Aqualon in the comments. Check out my blog on Patreon, where you can stay up to date on new videos, short stories and lore articles. And if you're considering to support Aqualon with a monthly donation, there is a lot of exclusive content waiting for you. And now a little shout out for my current supporters.